Outside of New England, the town manager is a much more regular feature in local government. But things are starting to change, and more towns and cities are adopting town or city managers. Joining us today is the longtime Windsor town manager and president of the Connecticut Town and City Management Association, Peter Souza, to talk about the benefits and consistency of a town manager form of government, collaborating with other CEOs, and more. We'd like to thank our sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Peter, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thanks for doing this. So one of the reasons we had you on the show today is that you are a town manager. And while a lot of us that work CCM and in town government understand what that means, for some of the people at home, especially the ones in the 130 towns in Connecticut that don't have that form of government, could you explain what a town manager does?
The position of town manager, city manager is quite dynamic. There's a whole host of different challenges, but from a 30,000 foot level, town manager is essentially the chief executive officer. Mm-hmm. You can kin that to perhaps to a corporation where we have a chief executive officer that implements policy and direction given by the board of directors. In local government, that could be the town or city council. Mm-hmm. And so we are charged with hiring competent, trained individuals. Mm-hmm. We have, as you know, from your involvement with CCM, we've had a whole host of different disciplines that fall within local government. Police department, recreation, obviously we have our internal departments such as finance. And so the goal of the town manager as CEO is to make sure they're all rowing in the same direction and making sure that we're carrying out the policies, the direction and aspirations that have been set forth by the elected body. So never a dull moment in the world of local government as a manager.
What are some of the kind of key differences functionally between like a chief elected executive officer with a council or a first selectman board in town and cities? What are kind of the day-to-day kind of functional differences?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question because each community, particularly in Connecticut, is a little bit different. We have large cities, Bridgeport, the Hartfords, all the way down to the smaller communities that still have first selectmen, first select person form of government, mm-hmm. Where they are directly elected and by the residents of their communities, and they are responsible for the day-to-day operations as well as leading the community in an elected form. Mm-hmm. So very, very different. Maybe some of the day-to-day operations can be similar, but they're wearing multiple hats where mm-hmm. they also have to worry about, if you will, the political aspects of their job. And so they often will need to have professional staff that work directly with them, but mm-hmm. ultimately the mayor of Hartford, for example, Mayor Bronin, is responsible for the day-to-day operations, even though they may have a chief executive or chief administrative officer. And so they have a more focus on perhaps the political aspects of the mm-hmm. community, where a manager does not. We have to be obviously aware and cognizant and be politically astute. But we are professionals. We are not elected on mm-hmm. a regular basis. And so we are able to perhaps make some decisions that are in a different context mm-hmm. Than those that may be facing election or re-election in the near term.
Yeah, you don't have to consider everything on that level. Is it election season? Will this hurt my chances this year? Now, you started your career in Kansas, and it seems like the manager form of government is more popular outside of New England. Do you know kind of why that is?
Partly it's just that we're obviously New England and parts of the Mid-Atlantic being the first communities to get established. Mm-hmm. We're grounded in a different time and place, if you will, where the town meeting form of government was
Mm-hmm.
strong. It was largely in the city manager council form, city council, city manager form of government, really
Mm-hmm.
grew out of the reform or good government era.
Okay.
You harken back to some of our history classes, and there was a huge amount of patronage and perhaps some corruption. And so the city manager and city council form of government has been around for over 100 years now. And it kind of grew out of that era. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the communities, as you further go to the west, didn't get even incorporated until well after, well into the 1800s and even some into the 1900s. And so had a lot of history. A lot of those came up, and companies, they knew what the company structure was,
Mm-hmm.
and many of those businesses said, okay, that seems to work well at that time for the corporations. Perhaps let's instill some professional government structure here. And so it's but some of the larger communities, when you go across the country,
Mm-hmm.
still have the mayor form of government.
Mm-hmm.
But even the cities like Phoenix, cities like Dallas and Fort Worth still have city manager form of governments along with their elected governing bodies.
Got it. So even though it's 100 years old, in as far as like Connecticut's towns are concerned, that's still kind of the new kid on the block as far as form of government wise, because we're obviously well beyond 100 in most of our towns.
Right.
That's very cool. So it's the land of steady habits with our histories and traditions that makes us lean a little bit more that way. That makes sense. Even in Connecticut now, a little over 30 towns and cities in Connecticut have a manager. And it seems like it's a growing trend of towns in Connecticut looking into it. What are some of the benefits that you see of a town or city manager for the towns that don't currently have one and may be considering going that way?
Mm-hmm. There certainly the consistency for day-to-day operations cannot be downplayed.
Mm-hmm.
We're in Connecticut, where most communities are having re-elections every 2 years, maybe 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
That consistency on a day-to-day in terms of policies, procedures, implementation of projects that carry well beyond a single term. Those are very important in order to deliver quality services, to maintain good fiscal health and fiscal policies. And we have some really fantastic first select persons that have been in Connecticut, but there's always that chance that that person chooses not to run for re-election, does not get re-elected, and having a professional manager in place that can hire and make employment decisions for the professional staff that deliver those services, in my estimation, is really important. I mean, it allows the day-to-day operations to focus on the manager to focus on day-to-day operations. It allows that elected body to focus on overall policies and procedures, policies and aspirations of that community. Focus more on the political aspects of understanding what the community wants, where it wants to go, versus needing to be able to split their time as a chief elected official between dealing with those type of items, as well as wondering, okay, how am I going to hire that building official or that recreation director, and are we implementing all of our HR policies as the world becomes more complex today?
Yeah. So the continuity is a big part of it, that it's not necessarily changing every 2 years or every multiple thereof.
And also the fact that managers we are trained. This is our chosen profession. Many of the first selectmen are absolutely well qualified in that they have a commitment to their communities, but they come from a whole host of different backgrounds.
There's no prerequisite to run for first selectman other than being a citizen who wants to serve their town.
Absolutely, and so that we have an opportunity to bring perhaps a more of a well-rounded approach to day-to-day operation management versus someone who perhaps has been only in one field, and even though has made a significant contribution and it's a significant risk to put your name out there to run for any office.
Yeah, it takes some guts, definitely.
Yeah, I don't want to downplay that by any means, but in terms of that day-to-day professionalism and that ability to hit the ground running, if you will, I think that a professional manager brings that to the table.
Are there any drawbacks to the town manager form of government that you see versus the other ones?
I would say in Connecticut, some of the concerns would be if you're a smaller rural community, how would they recruit and retain seasoned managers? That would be I would say a drawback. Some may say that a professional manager is not invested as much in a community as an elected official.
Because they don't have that having to run every 2 years to answer to everybody quite as much. Yeah.
I from my experience, and I've worked in 3 different states now, I don't see that as a significant concern. Professional managers are committed to public service, no matter if they're working in a small rural community or a larger community. My observation is that my colleagues and peer will put in whatever it takes to get the job done. The challenge will be at some of these smaller communities is that especially if you're hiring younger folks in their beginning of their careers, they may want different challenges. Yeah. And so that could be a drawback where there could be that consistency gets eroded a little bit because there may be a little bit more turnaround in the manager or administrative slot. But I think consistency is important, but that has a flip side as well. Historically, most manager communities have had history or tenure about 7 years, 7 to 8 years, 7 to 10 years. The last decade or so, it's probably been even a little bit longer, but that's going to change now as demographics occur. And so but I think that's in any industry. We're seeing a significant amount of retirements over the course of the last 2 to 3 years and probably into the next 5.
A lot of people shifting around.
Right.
Obviously, we're talking about town managers, but only 30 of the towns or so in Connecticut are. The other ones have elected officials. How do you work with the elected officials in other town administrations around you?
In North Central Connecticut, we have the Capital Region Council of Governments, or CROG as it's referred to. And that's been a great network. It's a voluntary body where 38 communities are represented. And so that's an opportunity for both the elected and the appointed professional staff to be able to get together, talk about common issues. In Windsor's particular case, we have good working relationships with communities such as Windsor Locks, Suffield, and East Granby, all which are first select person form of governments. And so we've made a point over the years to make those connections and to make sure that that we're communicating, we understand each other's goals and challenges, so that and perhaps we be able to work together. But at a minimum, we're aware of what's happening and sharing information. That's one of the goals that we have as a City Managers Association, is to make sure that we're providing resources so that we all can provide good quality public services to our residents. And so it's then each 2 years here, most communities have re-elections. And so what managers do, we will have orientation with our potential candidates. And then as they get elected, we'll have a full-blown orientation, just like as if you're coming on board as an employee. And so we'll sit down, try to educate and inform what the past council has been working on, what the goal, many of us have strategic plans that cut across the entire organization. We share those plans with them. And so that way there helps build continuity, not only at the staff level, but also with our elected officials from one administration to the next.
Yeah.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. when you're kind of managing those relationships, is there a chance that one administration wants you to start working on a project and then you get to the next administration and they say stop?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And I think that's the one of the strengths of a council manager form of government,
Mm-hmm.
where the council is able to act in that policy role,
Mm-hmm.
and at times, as a community needs change and evolve, they
Mm-hmm.
need to be attacked to the left or attack another
Yeah.
direction. And so the ability to be able to again build that continuity. Many communities, they do not have a wholesale change from
Mm-hmm.
one elected administration to the next, so that assists that. But we also have most communities will have a multi-year capital improvement program,
Mm-hmm.
which sets out over 5 or 6 years. It sets out what those capital projects are. Or we all have a plan of conservation and development,
Mm-hmm.
which also sets out what our land use goals are, and what our community character goals are. And so that helps to provide that that strength from one elected administration to the next. In Windsor, we had a significant, about a $35 million public safety complex project that really evolved over almost a decade between the time it was identified as a need, financial planning, working it into our capital and our debt management structure. And so that went over just about six different elections.
Wow.
And so we were able to keep that together. And but that's and I'd like to say that's because we have really good staff who've been here over that 10 to 12 year period, and we've been able to carry that out, even though we've seen pretty much 45 to 50% of our council switch in that 10-year period.
That's great that you've been able to kind of shepherd that project along through all those successive administrations.
Mm-hmm.
A town manager position requires some advanced degrees. You received a degree in public administration from the University of Kansas. How did you decide that this was the career that you wanted to pursue?
That is a long, involved story, but essentially, I was working for a nonprofit organization in the city of Worcester, Massachusetts, and I got exposed significantly to what local government is all about through that organization. I was kind of originally thought I wanted to be in land use planning or in private sector in the development world. I saw what local government provided. I saw the range of responsibilities, that it wasn't just simply a built environment, that the local government had direct impact to our residents each and every day, and all sorts of different services. And so that kind of got me excited. I happened to move back to my hometown, worked in local government there. They're actually changing from a town meeting form of government to a council manager form of government. And so I got another ground floor there for a couple of years, and then decided that it was really the path I wanted to go. And that's what brought me to relocate from New England to Kansas for graduate school.
Very cool. And what sort of things did you learn in that degree track? Like, what do they teach you to become, for public administration?
Yeah. In that particular program, there was a significant amount of work in the area of people management and human resources, organizational development, and leadership. Very much a generalist program. There's other programs such as the University of Connecticut. Their master's program has a strong focus in finance, and so each program may have a different focus. Some will focus more, on finance. Some will be more generalist in nature. Some will focus a little bit more on the used to be engineering, the built environment. That's changed significantly over the last 2 decades. So a lot of focus on leadership, organizational development, obviously finance, understanding public finance, which is different than I always say business finance, and then obviously the area around law. Law is we are creatures of in Connecticut, we're the creatures of the state, And so understanding the enabling legislation and how legislation is developed, as well as how the federal government influences local government, either be at the Supreme Court or through the other branches of federal government.
So there's a lot to the degree, and it sounds like depending on maybe what exactly you want to go into afterwards, like if you want to be a town manager or a CFO, you might pick a different school with a different slight concentration. Like you said, UConn was good for finance, so maybe if you want to be a CFO or something like that in a town,
right,
that might be the way to go. That's very cool.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you've learned since being on the job that shocked you or just unexpected from what you learned in the classroom?
I will say that the classroom is great from a theory perspective, but until you are out there, boots on the street, if you will, on the ground, there's a lot of different aspects of the job that you just learn through experience. No matter what discipline you're in, your own discipline, I'm sure, was the same situation. As much as I had a lot of experience and exposure in the classroom to leadership and organizational development theory, until you really got into an organization and opened up the hood and started to tinker around with it. A lot easier reading in a book than actually there turning the wrenches and really trying to motivate folks and set long-term goals help set long-term goals for an organization.
So you get the good theories, the big ideas at school, but when you're actually there in the job, you kind of look under the hood and learn how everything actually works together a little bit more.
Yes. Yeah. It's not always as planned. That's for sure.
So would you recommend to people out there thinking about that they should go into this line of work? Would you encourage more people to go into public service?
I certainly would. It's been tremendously satisfying for me and many of my colleagues across the country. The ability to see your work each and every day, unlike the state or the federal government, local government's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. We are the folks that are not only helping day-to-day perspectives, but we're also helping to shepherd the community to meet their long-term goals, no matter what it is in what community. And that's tremendously satisfying. You can one moment you can be having a conversation with a long-time resident and trying to help them navigate what their issue might be, all the way up to, then an hour later you're working on a long-range affordable housing plan for your community. So it's very satisfying. Not only as you start out your career, but I think it's also opportunity for folks that maybe are mid-career, that are maybe looking for a different type of role. There's quite a few folks now that are moving from the military that are, perhaps they're reaching the end of their 20, 25 years or so. They're starting to now look at local government as an opportunity. Definitely transferable skills there. So certainly certainly opportunity I think for a lot of different folks to join public service. And again, I'm obviously biased. I love local government, but there's jobs at the state level that certainly are just as satisfying for folks. So I would encourage folks to take a look at it. If even if it's not from a professional perspective, even to be an opportunity to volunteer. Each of our communities have a significant amount of resident involvement, and so I would encourage folks to take a look at this too, just to be able to get a little bit of a taste of what your local government does. Many of us offer citizens academies that provide those opportunities to say, to get a closer look to what their local governments do. So I'd encourage folks to do that, and that might be able to say, hey, I never even thought about maybe being, doing that for a career.
Yeah. And would you have any suggestions for maybe some students that are in high school or college that are thinking about doing this, like what they should concentrate on or a good way for them to go about it?
That's interesting. I think trying to, again, get exposed to what local government is. I often will go to the Windsor High School, and many of my colleagues will go to their local schools and speak about what local government is and what local government isn't. It's often it's a different it's a different perspective, and you hear that perspective. It's good for us as managers to hear that, what students think, what our young residents think about what local government is, but also for again, to be exposed. There's a ton of ways now to get exposed compared to there was 10 or 15 years ago. Simply doing projects, but there's also internships. Communities offer internships not only for the upper grades at high school, but also for those in in college and graduate level. Offer those. Town of Windsor has probably right now 5 or 6 summer interns.
Oh, that's cool.
That we're doing everywhere from in our HR department, economic development, to here in the town manager's office. So, and many of my colleagues offer the same opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. So for students, maybe, an internship or even just a summer job of some sort, just volunteering, getting involved in local government on whatever level
absolutely.
you can help clue you into whether or not you want to really expand and pursue that in the future. As we noted at the beginning of the show, you are, in addition to being the town manager of Windsor, you are also the president of the Connecticut Town and City Management Association, which is an educational association group for other government administrators and managers. What kind of work do you do as president for that association, and what kind of developments does that association offer to its members?
Great. So we're, as you said, we're educational. We're a professional networking organization. We are affiliated with the International City Managers Association, which is our well, I guess this worldwide association. But here in Connecticut, we meet on a regular basis as an opportunity to share best practices, to be able to, if it's simply just even in that social situation where I can ask a colleague, say, geez, I'm having this challenge with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Any ideas? And vice versa. I can at least share my perspectives. May not be completely applicable to the town of Columbia, but I can be able to at least share that or provide a little bit of resources. Oh, I didn't deal with that one, but I know someone else, and here's a name.
Yeah.
We do bring in folks on from the state government to provide us some background, especially as we approach budget season. We bring some of the appointed commissioners or folks from different OPM or from DECD, talk a little bit about where they're going, what their directions are. Again, to try to stay plugged into that. But we also have educational formats where we'll bring other experts in from around the country just to be able to give us a little bit of insights into what's happening outside of our 169 communities here in Windsor. I mean, here in Connecticut.
Yeah, definitely. And aside of Connecticut, and then as you mentioned, you're through that Connecticut organization, you're part of the international organization. So through that international, do you ever learn things or work with towns from other countries? Are there stuff that's going on abroad that's interesting and applicable to Connecticut's towns?
There is, there certainly are. It's amazing what local government is across the world. As I said earlier, this is where the rubber meets the road. And so there's opportunities to, even though their form of government may be a little bit different, they may have stronger state involvement in local government or direction. We are able to learn some of those best practices. There's programs where city managers from across the country have gone to abroad and have done week-long visits to be able to really immerse themselves into what they're happening. I haven't taken my advantage of that. I got enough here going on in little old Windsor. So, but there's those opportunities. There's annual educational programs that folks from across the country across the world come and present, and so you're able to garner a little bit, like anything else. You get a little bit of snippet here and there, and say, that might work in our community, even though it might come from a community that's 3 times the size of your community. You say, that might help us address one of our challenges we have locally.
Yeah, everyone's got different challenges, but everyone's got to keep the roads put together and the garbage getting picked up, and the rubber meets the road. So we always like to go on a positive note and ask about the future. Are you positive about the future? What do you think the future will be for town managers in Connecticut?
it'd be interesting. As say earlier, there's a lot of different factors that go into how our local community chooses to govern themselves. Each community has unique needs. They have unique past practices. But we do know that the world continues to evolve at an unbelievably fast pace. And so that, I believe, will put some increased pressure on on some communities to consider changing to the council manager form of government, or even at a minimum to bring on full-time administrators for those folks that elected remain a board of selectmen with a town meeting form of government. The demands on that full-time elected official are significant. To be not only the political leader, but also the day-to-day leader of an organization. And so I do see the potential for it to grow here in Connecticut. I also see the opportunities for some smaller communities to perhaps have a shared professional administrator.
So a little bit of regionalism on the administrative side of things.
Yes, just to be able to get just the HR policies that continue to evolve, new state laws, new federal decisions that are being made as they trickle down. Sometimes it's not so much of a trickle. Sometimes it's a downpour. And so, how can those smaller organizations, but also large organizations, and I don't want to put that this is only good for smaller communities. It's also good for a good form of government for larger communities, which can even have more complexities given some of the demands that they have. And so the learning curve for a newly elected official is tremendous. If you come from the banking world and you try just to learn government accounting, it's different. And so just that aspect, even though someone may know the financials aspect of it. So the learning curve is huge. Having professional administrations in place can help that and allow those elected folks to focus on the larger community needs, the aspirations of that community, no matter where they are in their stage of development or growth.
Well, Peter, thanks so much for speaking with us today. It sounds like Windsor's in pretty good hands.
Well, thank you very much. As I said earlier, it's a very satisfying career public service, and I just think, as everyone knows, there's all sorts of aspects to public service. You don't need to be a city manager to get great satisfaction for delivering services. In Windsor, we have 13 different departments, almost 13 different departments or companies all working together in a fashion. So if your focus is human services, recreation, finance, there's a job for you in public service. So
that's good. That's a good pitch for doing public service, Peter. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you to CCM for all the work you folks do.
We'd like to thank our guest, Peter Souza. I'd like to thank our sponsors at Gateway Community College and Housatonic Community College. Learn more at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Mary Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page. If you enjoy the Municipal Voice and are interested in more news and insights on local government, you can read CCM's flagship magazine, Connecticut Town and City. It's the indispensable news source for anyone who wants to stay up to date on any issues affecting Connecticut's towns and cities. It's free, and the summer issue is out now and available at ccm-ct.org.